Good morning and welcome to Altair Advisors Spring Forum. I'm Anna Nichols. I'm the Director of Communications at Altair, and I'm here live from my home office where I've been now for 13 or 14 months at this point. And I have to say, I still miss gathering together in person. But that said, we are excited to have people from all over the country online with us today. So welcome and welcome. Most of you know us because our audience is primarily Altair clients. But for those of you who are a guest, Altair is a private, independent wealth advisory firm. We provide investment management, financial planning, and client education services to a select group of individuals, couples, families, endowments, and foundations. Our firm tagline is Wealth Guidance for Life, and we take it a little bit literally. We believe that clients make decisions about their wealth based on what they want that wealth to promote and enable, not only in their lives, but in the lives of their family members. And programs like this are really an extension of that belief. This is actually the third forum that we have held on the issue of aging and longevity. The other two were primarily focused on managing the care of aging parents. But when you serve family clients, issues around longevity, around aging, they come up, whether with the direct client or with that client's family. And they're hard topics for people to address. And they're hard in part because they're complex. They have lots of issues that go with them. There's legal components, there's financial components, there's housing and healthcare, there's emotional aspects to them. They're also just hard, I think, because as humans, we don't like to think about our own mortality or that of our parents. And so we tend to have we have a tendency to kind of put these things off and to not address them while we're going about our busy lives. But the problem with that means that when we put them off, when we do address them, it's usually because there's a state of crisis. And that, of course, is the worst environment for making decisions. And it also may mean that the main person involved, whether it's yourself or another senior in your family, may not have an ability at that point to express his or her views or choices in that situation. So what we're going to try and do over the next couple of days, over today and tomorrow, is look at what are the choices that we have that we can express in advance. And we're not trying to get to a state of perfection. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know how things are going to work out. But there are a lot of things we can do simply by putting things in place and by then communicating those to our family members. So there's lots of things we don't have control over in the future, but we're going to focus on what are the choices we have, what are the things we can do. And you won't have to listen to me the whole time during the next 2 days. We have a great roster of speakers joining us. First and foremost, I want to introduce Jim Grubman. He will be my co-facilitator across today and tomorrow. And Jim really co-designed this program for us and put a lot of work and his expertise into it. So I appreciate all that he's done to make this program happen today. Specifically, he's going to be introducing a new framework that's going to help with the complexity of this topic and help people look at all the different components of it. Jim is a neuropsychologist. He's a consultant and author, a speaker and educator. And having spent 20 years in the family wealth space, I can say he is the leading expert in the field of family wealth psychology. And interestingly enough, while we were putting together this program, Jim received a call from Harvard. They have a team that is actually starting to look at issues of longevity, and they want Jim to come in and share his expertise and participate in that project with them. And I think it's kind of great that Harvard has to wait because Jim is working on our program right now. So you can really say that you heard it here first, but we're excited to have Jim with us and appreciate his time. Also, we will be joined by two professionals who are very much on the front lines of these issues with families. Marty Chisick is a nurse, a geriatric care manager, and founder of Charism Elder Care Services, which is a firm focused on healthcare navigation and advocacy. She has consulted in the healthcare industry for more than 20 years, specializing in this segment. And Marty actually already works with several of Altair clients. So we feel very fortunate to know her and to be able to connect our clients with her expertise. Tomorrow, you will also hear from Joanne Dunphy-Flynn, who's the founder of Consultants on Disability, which is a firm focused on care management, guardianship, and life planning solutions for seniors, as well as disabled adults and minors. Joanne and her firm were a recent introduction to us, and I've been so impressed by the work that they do, not only around issues of aging, but also in helping in situations where there's a family member with special needs. So we look forward to introducing her to you tomorrow. Also joining us tomorrow is Altair CEO Rebecca Comesher, and Becca, by her position, is very much at the forefront of determining the policies and the processes that we want to have as a firm to support our clients with different aging issues. As you can imagine, we sit in a bit of a unique position to see these situations come up, and we'll share some examples and how we deal with those things tomorrow. Also, let's see. The agenda, I don't want to give everyone Zoom fatigue, so we've split this forum across 2 days. So today we're going to start off by hearing from Jim. He's going to take us through a framework for organizing and addressing all the different components of longevity. Again, this topic is hard because it has all those different components, so we're going to talk a little bit about how do we eat this elephant. After that, we'll take a quick break, and then I'm going to interview Marty Chisick on how to start and have a productive conversation on aging and longevity as a family. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the day, but throughout the day, if you do have a question, you see an Ask a Question feature on your screen, and you can use that to submit questions, so please do that. Then for tomorrow, Jim will be back with us to talk through specific choices and on different components of longevity and how to think about those, how to document them. Oops, let's see. After that, Becca Comesher and Joanne Dunphy-Flynn will provide a little color on these topics, and they'll share their expertise in helping clients across different aspects of aging. And then we're going to have a little bit of an actual workshop where we're going to ask you to think about what are your top priorities in your situation? What are things you can get working on right now? And to that, there's also a section of your screen that has the materials. It's right under the event resources, if you can see that on your screen. You can download a document called Altair Forum Worksheet. This was actually sent out by email probably 2 days ago to everyone that was registered by that point. But the goal of the worksheet, if you would like to use it, is at the end of each session, we want to say, how do you make this applicable in your life? Because if you're like me, you go to a lot of forums where you learn interesting things, but then you walk away at the end and you don't take actionable steps. So we're hoping you will take actionable steps, and we developed this worksheet in order to help you do that. So if you haven't already done that, I would encourage you to look at the event resource section on your screen and download that document. You can also download the materials for the program on that section as well. So with that said, we look forward to working with you on this topic over the next day, and we look forward to your questions. And I am going to hand things over to Jim.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here. As you mentioned, we've worked together many times before, and I think we have a great program over the next 2 days for everybody. And I really want to reinforce what Anna said, which is we want to make this practical, we want to make this actionable, and we want to hear from you out there, that we want to know what's top of mind for you. Ask questions, make comments. If you're not sure about something, Zoom is not the greatest format for doing this. So we really want to hear from you, and we want to make this what you can benefit from and what you need. And so with that, I'm going to tell you a little story. I want to tell you about my mother, Sally. My mother, who I will tell you died in 2017 at the age of 103, largely cognitively intact, although was beginning to show some symptoms. She obviously had a long, good life, and toward the latter part of her years, I helped her quite a bit, and we did many of the things that you are going to be seeing in this webinar about preparing for a time when she might not be able to take care of things for herself or make some decisions for herself. And as a designated responsible son, I knew what her wishes were. We had all the signatures. In many ways, it was a very optimal situation. I would also mention, if you want to picture Sally, picture a little Polish European Jew who was basically under 5 feet tall. Tiny little thing, sort of a Dr. Ruth looking person. But what I want to tell you about is that about 4 or 5 years before she passed, so she was at the ripe old age of 98, she and I were talking one time, and we were talking about Mary. Mary was a good friend of hers, probably in her mid-50s or so. Mary had visited for many years. They knew each other for a long time, and Mary would help bring her to doctor's appointments, take her various places if she needed to go to the grocery store. Mary spent a fair number of hours with my mother, and it was very good. And one time I was visiting my mother, and she happened to mention, I said, "How's Mary?" And we talked, and she says, Mary said, I could really depend on her, and that maybe I didn't need to have you involved quite so much. And I said, "Oh," and I asked her a few questions, and it became clear that Mary was basically saying to my mother, "You can depend on me, Mary. You don't need your son for a lot of these things. I see you much more." She was in Cleveland and I'm in the Northeast. And, you just don't need to tell him or depend on him so much. I was aware that my mother had a checkbook in her apartment, and that Mary took her to the bank and a variety of other things. So fortunately, my mother and I had a good relationship, and I said, "Well, I'm a little concerned about that, and that I really would not want to change anything around." And fortunately, my mother said, "Okay," and I can understand that. But what I began to realize was that Mary was really trying to move my mother away from my management and to take her over, and questions of undue influence and potential fraud were arising, even with everything all well set. Eventually, I got involved where I communicated with Mary directly and said we were going to set up an arrangement so that when she took my mother places, I would pay her for that. We moved it from a casual friendship to a caregiving arrangement so that I could monitor it more. It was amazing how quickly Mary disappeared. So I tell you the Mary story as a cautionary tale to say, first of all, even under the best of circumstances, things can happen. And number two, imagine if we didn't have the best of circumstances, a relationship where I knew my mother's wishes, a collaboration between her and me, the documents all set and prepared, ongoing monitoring. These are the things that need to be in place long before you need them. And when those are in place, you can defend against a variety of things that can occur. And so with that, what I'm going to do is now help all of you deal with the overwhelming mass of things that go into preparing for longevity and for situations that you may need to be prepared for later in life, or sometimes when difficult things happen earlier in life. The major problem that Anna and I talked about was how many things there are to work on, sign, keep track of, update, do, and then rinse and repeat, to keep up on all that and to make sure on an ongoing basis, because sometimes things change or need to be updated. And what I'm going to show you now is there is a new model that has just been developed with what's called the Ultra High Net Worth Institute that I'm involved with. It's a nonprofit think tank. And that what I have helped develop there and what we've worked on together is a model for understanding all the various things that need to go on when you are affluent or have some significant wealth. In order to organize and make more manageable the many needs that families have, we developed what we call a model of the 10 domains of family wealth. I'm going to be showing this to you momentarily. By organizing things as in the 10 domains, we're actually going to use that now for this situation, because I'm going to show you with this model how, in fact, the, again, overwhelming mass of things that need to be done can be understood in categories and in different domains. And we're going to offer you this. This is in the handout that is part of a PDF handout for these slides, which you can access, so that you can understand and begin to make sense of what goes where in what you have to do. So let's take a look at this. What you're seeing on the screen here is the 10 domains of family wealth, and that it looks at very carefully the various elements and needs that families have with affluence or wealth. And so let's go through this and look one by one. We're going to go through the clusters and see the different categories. In the wealth creation and stewardship cluster, number one is integrated financial management. And this traditionally gets all the attention, which is the money, managing the money and all the various things that go into asset management, financial wealth management, all the things that people typically think of when they think of wealth. But there also is estate planning and legal issues, all the many things that go into the legal aspect when you have money, and risk management. And so in this cluster, let's look at those things that you probably have been told about or tried to work on and match them to the different domains. So if we look at what is in the integrated financial management domain of what you need to do to prepare for situations of longevity, potential loss of mental abilities, crisis management. There is the list of all accounts. There should be some central place to do that. Where the checkbooks are and financial account passwords, and we're going to go into more detail about those passwords momentarily. Important financial names and their contact information, who your advisors are. If you have any retirement plans, the retirement beneficiary designations, because those may or may not be contained elsewhere, for example, in living trusts or otherwise. Listing and accounting for annuities, pensions, if you have any veterans benefits, deferred or recurring income. Somebody should know when checks are coming in, where those are coming from, what they're related to. Any other recurring payments that need to be made or are made, bill paying arrangements, and again, websites and passwords, very important. Tax returns may need to, somebody may need to access those. And then safety deposit boxes, their location and the keys and any combinations of safes. People need to get into those safes if you're not around or not available. So you can see, looking just simply at the first domain of financial management, there are a whole variety of things, and these are what we traditionally think of when we think about keeping track of things. But there's more, as they say in late night TV. Under estate planning and legal, there are, again, names and contact information for your important legal advisors, a list of all legal documents and their locations, where your will is, trusts, other sorts of things. The list of all personal legal information, names, date of birth, social security numbers, other tax IDs if they exist. Personal legal documents if needed to support documentation. Birth certificates, all the things that are listed here, passports, driver's license. Somebody may need these as supporting documentation to some of the other documents. If relevant, military service records and VA claims, your will, durable power of attorney, and tomorrow we're actually going to go through and look at some specifics about that. Trusts with the location of documents and who the trustees are, who in particular, if you are a trustee, who the successor trustees are, because you may not be able to function as a trustee. Mortgages, deeds, and other legal ownership documents. So you with us so far? You can see organizing some of these things, not just as a huge long list, but by domain, may help you systematically go through and work on things. And that's what we're hoping for. In the risk management domain, it's more than just insurance, but it does involve insurance. There are names of important insurance advisors and their contact, list of all property and casualty policies and locations, disability, long-term care insurance policies. If you have executive insurance, such as key person, other employment risk policies, what is related to employment or work. And here, and we put this in capital letters, digital assets, logins, passwords for everything. And this is going to be probably one of the hardest things in the modern era, keeping track. Many people use a password manager. So obviously the password to get into that central password manager is important, but keeping software that aggregates things may be really useful to start thinking of going ahead and moving toward that.
Jim?
Yes, Anna.
One thing I wanted to say to illustrate this when you brought up this point, I know you and I have talked about this, is we had a client who passed away very suddenly and very unexpectedly and had a good deal of his password and other information on his iPhone. And no one had the passcode to that. And Apple will not give it to you.
No, they won't.
It took a long time and a lot of frustration because there were certain documents that in order to access them and certain things, we had to get onto that phone, or his spouse had to get onto that phone. We just could have saved a lot of frustration if that had just simply, if she had been told at some point, hey, if something ever happens to me, it's right here. But it was one of those things that until it happened, I don't think anyone had really thought much about it. But it was a problem when something happened.
One of the things that this brings up is, so how do you secure your security? Right. I've dealt with clients who said, wait a minute, if I set all that up, am I setting myself up for identity theft? Suppose somebody fraudulently, they have everything for me. They could do incredible damage. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to give the keys away to everything. Mm-hmm. And yet you have to be able to create a secure system. So one of the things that that client did, and I've seen with many other clients, and Anna, maybe you have some other suggestions, is you can split things up where, for example, you give the logins and the list of all the logins to one trusted advisor, and you give the passwords correspondingly to another trusted advisor, or say your lawyer. Mm-hmm. So no one has everything, but between the two of them, and with documentation that they're using it, they would be able then to access everything. So that's one way to deal with this.
Okay.
Let's keep moving. Let me go back for 1 second and notice social media logins, passwords, and closure documents. I can tell you from personal experience, my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, passed away probably nearly 10 years ago. And about 3 months ago, somebody said that her Facebook page had been accessed. They sent a text saying, "Did you know that Rosalie's Facebook page was just somebody posted on it?" And we thought, we totally forgot about that. Fortunately, because I had helped my mother-in-law with some of that, I vaguely remembered her login and password. Sure enough, it worked. We went in and we closed the Facebook page. Don't forget social media. Let's go through the next cluster. There is governance and decision-making. Now, this is mostly applicable if you have a family enterprise or you have a responsible position in the decision-making within the extended family. And I will show sort of what's relevant in this domain, but not everybody may have something here. Leadership and transition planning is an important domain in ultra high net worth wealth. Again, not everybody has it in an affluent wealth situation, but preparing leaders and individuals for coming into responsible positions is in this domain. Learning, development, and the rising generation. This is about raising children with wealth, developing their skills. You can see this cluster is about the development of family capital. And so what is relevant for some of you in the audience is issues around governance, so that if you have a family or even non-family business responsibilities and interests, remember, you have shareholder agreements, buy-sell agreements, and other contractual responsibilities. If something were to happen to you, somebody needs to be able to know where those things are and to access that. Also, if you are on a board of directors or more than one, there should be transition planning well in place, including providing for mental incapacity for any responsible position that you have long before you need it. If we move then to the next cluster, let's look at the cluster of human advancement that touches on family dynamics, health and well-being, and social impact and philanthropy. And in this cluster, under family dynamics, the things that you have to pay attention to and do are to have the conversation that you need to be able, with one or all of the family, to be able to talk with your loved ones about end-of-life issues, distribution of personal property, and other estate planning matters. In many ways, this is one of the most important things that you have to do. Many people put off having these sorts of conversations. They're afraid of family meetings. They don't want to make things worse. Maybe there's some tricky issues in the family. But as Anna and I and others will talk about, it is something that you need to figure out. And there are ways to deal with this. For health and well-being, these are, in fact, many of the things that relate to situations that will require the documents and procedures that we're talking about. The healthcare directives. And again, I'll be going into a little bit more detail tomorrow on this. Living will, power of attorney for healthcare, planning for mental incapacity by transferring responsibilities, setting up designated individuals. These are all the things that, in fact, relates to if you start to have difficulties with health and well-being and your capacity to make decisions. If you have any medical records relevant to end-of-life care, remember, you need to sign under HIPAA and privacy regulations with your providers that they will be able to discuss and share information with important people. And so again, make sure if you have that option that you've explored that. So if you are not there, the healthcare system is going to invoke privacy and may be very difficult to access for people under crisis circumstances. Under social impact and philanthropy, remember, there are the charitable bequests and any philanthropic documents that may need to occur. If you have donor advised funds or other philanthropic vehicles, and if you have responsibilities in a foundation or a board related to a foundation, remember, just like being on a board of directors, you need to be planning for if something happens to you, and not necessarily that you may no longer be alive, but that you may start to have difficulty with mental, cognitive abilities. There is one more domain that is very important in the 10 domains of family wealth. We actually put it at the center of the entire graphic and at the center of all the domains, which is the advisor-client relationship. In every single domain, you have a relationship with the important people you work with. And so you need to remember there are things related to that relationship that you have to pay attention to and make arrangements for. First of all, accessing your important advisors and getting their help in exactly what we are talking about today and tomorrow may be the best thing that you can do. They, like Altair, may be very available to you to actually help you with the things that you need to do. And so they may be able to collect documents, aggregate them, keep them, and be available. Remember, by the way, if you change advisors, you need to port over and make sure all of that information is moved to your new advisors. There are, we will talk about tomorrow, new regulations in the financial system authorizing your advisors that if they see you perhaps maybe in a Mary kind of situation where somebody is influencing what's going on, or you are starting to make decisions that are uncharacteristic of you, there actually is some new regulation that we will discuss that says your advisor, you give permission for your advisor to contact a person that you designate and give a heads up and express concern so that somebody knows that this might be going on. A basic question is, if you are gone, who's the client? Just like in the healthcare system, the financial services system has privacy and confidentiality regulations, and they need to know what the transition plan is for you. Those people also need to meet your advisors. So you have to introduce your family to your important advisors so that if you are either hit by a bus or hit by a virus like COVID, those people have at least met and perhaps have a relationship with the important people responsible for the family. And again, you can enlist your advisors to help with the family conversations that need to occur. And we will talk about that. If you are hesitant, not quite sure how things can go, and you need a facilitator or guidance, a coach on what's going on, your advisors may be able to step up and help you with that. So you can see that organizing things in the 10 domains of family wealth organizes it and makes it easier in such a way that we hope may be able to reduce some of the overwhelming nature that we often feel. The hallmark of wealth is complexity. It adds significant complexity to life, to family, to many things. And so to make that complexity manageable in this set of tasks that we want to encourage you to do, the 10 domains may be your guide, may be a map that will help you move forward and get some things done that maybe you had been putting off or procrastinating. So now that we have gone through that, I'm going to, first of all, let you read a variety of questions that you may want to think about. Because you probably have at some time started at least some of these things. And so, are there things that you need to update? What is missing? When was the last time you updated anything? Who can help you with this? You do not have to be alone in this. And we want to get you started in thinking what might be either the top 3 priorities or 3 places simply where you might begin to look at working on this. We have worked on and included for this webinar, for your benefit, a worksheet, and that is part of the resources. I think Anna is emailing the worksheet to anybody who messages, but it's also available in the resources. The worksheet is your guide through today and tomorrow, and actually for after this webinar. We want you, after each one of these sessions, to write some things down and to begin compiling ideas, tasks, things that you might do. And at the end of the session tomorrow, we will pull all of this together. You will use your worksheet, and we will talk about what you can do when you walk away from this so that you can get moving on some of these things.
And Jim, just to let people know, at first, I think the event resources did not show up on the viewer screen. So It should be now, but if it just doesn't show up on your screen, you can hit, if you're on a PC, you can hit Control-R and it will show up, or you can hit Command-R if you're on a Mac. So hitting those will refresh your screen and then you'll be able to see that. We're also we'll email it out as well, make sure everyone has it. It was emailed. There's a link to it from an email that everyone that was registered by yesterday should have received, but we'll make sure people get that.
Great. Okay. At this point, we can have a little bit of a Q&A, and Anna, you and I can have some discussion about this, but also for those of you who are watching in the webinar, feel free to type in the Q&A box and to contribute questions, and we will see what we can do to answer those and to help you with further information about that.
And Jim, as we wait for questions to come in, can I ask you to talk a little bit about your red folder that you have?
The red folder.
Talk about the red folder. It's a great example.
What's interesting about more than 10 years ago, I think almost 12 or 15 years ago, my wife and I, and we now have 3 children in their 30s, and with only a little provocation, I will show you many pictures of my grandchildren. They're really cute. But I turned to my wife and I said, here I work with so many families and suggest family meetings. We don't do family meetings. So we decided we were going to start doing family meetings, and we did with our kids who at that time were teenage to early 20s. One of the main things, and we discussed things pretty openly in the family, and we have continued. They have talked about how much they love the fact that we do this as a tradition in the family now. But in the very first meeting, one of the things that they asked is if something were to happen what's going to happen to us? Where is everything? It's all in your head, Dad, and in your files, Dad. We would be in tough shape. So the very first action step that came of that first meeting was we decided to set up a folder and a place with many of the things that I've talked about here. And when I went to the file cabinet, I found there was a nice red file folder, like a pocket folder. And it became the red folder. Look in the red folder. The passwords, they're in the red folder. And so it's a shorthand that our family uses for many of the things that we are talking about. And I'm going to admit something. I probably need to go back and look at that red folder myself. It's been a while since I looked at it. So this is helping me in my own work. What else have we got, Anna?
We just had actually, well, one person wrote in to say it's really rewarding when you can get everything in one notebook, which is like their version of the red folder. Before we move on, I also want to tell people that Altair has a great client organizer document, and we can make that available to everyone after the program. It's on our website as well under financial planning, but it will give you an outline of everything that goes in the red folder. So if you're thinking, well, I don't even know what to put in there, you don't have to guess at it. We can help you with that. We have that outline for you. So we can put that together for you.
Excellent.
Another question that came in is someone said, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the next segment too, but someone asked, when families are reluctant to pull the trigger on updating their legacy information, their wills and trusts, how do you get people to stop procrastinating?
There's a couple different techniques that I use. Obviously, one of the first things that I do is I listen. People usually have a reason. And instead of pushing, prodding, or offering to take over, I will often start with a basic question, which is, what is it that you are either nervous about or concerned about in moving ahead with this, in doing this? Mm-hmm. People often have either general reasons, but often they have a very specific reason. A very common one is that there is some stress in the family, or that they're not quite sure that they want to face something. Maybe there's a grown child with a substance abuse problem, and updating documents brings forward the idea of, what are we going to do with that? And it's like, I don't want to think about that. Sometimes there has been an event that they're not quite sure, and maybe that they're embarrassed about, to bring up with an advisor. And they know that if they update the document, they're going to have to talk about or disclose something. The first thing is to find out, is there a why? There may be a reason, and a great advisor takes time to listen, to understand, maybe to brainstorm, but at the very least to offer support. Because often when the family member, who's the client, shares this and feels understood and works with somebody, they can start to do problem solving that they were stuck with. So that's the first step. Number two, sometimes what I'll remind people is, okay, let's assume, and in many cultures, let's assume that, something happened to you tomorrow. In some cultures or religions, it's you shouldn't say that. And it's like, well, suppose, you were hit by a bus yesterday. Let's look at exactly what's going to happen right now as things stand. And sometimes walking through what often is going to be the damage that will occur helps people understand this is really important, and I don't want to make that become a reality. I guess you're right. Let's go ahead and do it. So actually looking at the status quo, what will happen as of right now without these documents done, is a wake-up call. The third tip is sometimes, particularly with older individuals, is to see if you can get a family member in, maybe, a trusted person, adult child, or a younger sibling, somebody. And to see if you can do a little problem solving and procrastinating. Very often, people in the family simply don't know that the elder is way behind and procrastinating on this. They may be willing to bring somebody in who then has leverage or can get involved and they can have a conversation. So sometimes you need to expand who you're working with beyond the individual if they will permit that. Those are 3 tips you might consider.
Okay. I also think it can be helpful sometimes in getting people to move forward on these things when they don't want to, is explaining that this is really the only way your voice is going to be heard. The problem with procrastinating is then if something happens to where we don't know what you want, then other people have to guess. And I think most of us don't want our family members to have to guess. And that can also raise conflicts. Like if I want something for my mom, but my sister wants something different and we don't know what mom wants, well, now we have a problem that we really probably didn't need to have.
Yeah. And what's interesting is there was a famous case in Vermont, and I'm blocking on the woman's name. She was a famous, I think she was a children's author. After her death, there was a huge estate fight and all sorts of stuff. And in, I think it was one of her letters beforehand, she wrote, "I know that there will be a huge fight after I'm gone, but I don't care. I will be gone."
Oh.
And, when you're faced with that, it's like, I know I'm leaving a mess and I'm just not going to do anything about it. Let them figure it. There's nothing you can do, and the advisors just need to prepare, and the family needs to prepare that it's going to be costly. It's going to be stressful. It's probably going to damage some family relationships, sometimes irrevocably. And, there's going to be sadness all the way around.
Wow. Well, let's hope we don't get things to that point. So that's definitely not, that's what we're trying to avoid.
This is what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. One of the things I like to tell people is money and surprises never go well together. So I'm a big believer in communicating, even if what you're communicating is hard to express and something that maybe people don't want to hear. It's better to let them know in advance while you can than to have surprises come up. Definitely.
Exactly. And a question that I often get is there's so much to do, and I'm not sure I have anybody I can trust with knowing all this stuff. I mentioned that when we were going through the 10 domains, that it's sort of a catch-22. In order to have things be secure in your lifetime, you need to be able to aggregate these things and make them somehow available under secure conditions. Not everybody has either family members or is trusting of advisors in such a way. And so for those of you in the audience who may be in that situation, what I would say is your first order of business is you need to fix that problem. You may not be able to fix it in the family, but you may need to either, get a trusted advisor or go to your trusted advisor and pick one and realize that you need to have somebody. If you don't have anybody in your system that you have established a relationship with that is trusting, the first problem is you may need to, work on that problem so that somebody knows the choices that you want to make and knows where everything is after you're not around to make those choices.
Actually, Jim, along the same lines, another thing that's been brought up is letters of intent. Whether you're writing, I found that actually my husband and I recently redid our estate planning a couple of years ago. And the sort of last part I had to do, or I wanted to do, was write a letter to my children that should, both of us get hit by a bus on the same day, would be with that information to say, here's kind of what your dad and I were thinking about when we put this together. And that would also go to the trustee for them to have some sense of like, this is kind of how we see these things. But to be honest, that's the part I put off the longest because I had to sit down and really think about it. And it was emotional, and it just took me a long time to get to that part. It was sort of like almost a year behind everything else. But what is your thought on letters of intent, and whether should there be a separate one for the trustee? Those kind of things. Your kind of personal voice coming through.
Anna, you probably put your finger on one of the most important things, which is a letter to those that you love, that is in your voice. I was once working with a family, and I was dealing with two parents who said almost word for word what you just said. And I worked with them and encouraged them. And what they did is they nibbled away at it. I said, just begin. Pick a day when you have a little bit of time and sit down and start. You can pick it up again later or whatever. What was interesting was they found a couple things. Number one, they found that when they actually sat down to start doing it, it started to roll with momentum.
Right.
And they really got into it, and they had ideas back and forth, and they wordsmithed it and whatever. And then they came back to it, and they wound up spending over 2 weeks on it to get it where they wanted. But the second outcome was that they actually shared it with their adult children. And the tears and closeness that resulted were quite a surprise to the parents. The father said to me, he said, look, I didn't think any of this was rocket science. It's like, work hard, care for each other. We want you to be responsible. It almost sounded like, very mundane sorts of things. The children said, we know that you have felt this way, but seeing it in print and knowing that we will have this for our children and our grandchildren, this is your voice. These are your words. This is you. They were incredibly touched by it, and it actually changed the family. So what seems very much like, I've probably said this a million times before, maybe you don't even want to hear this from me again, turns out to be, in a letter of wishes, one of the best, most valuable legacy gifts you can give.
Wow. I know, too, I serve as a trustee for a family member, and I asked the two parents, I said, I'll do it, but I want you to give me a letter expressing these things, or sort of what you want for me to think about as a trustee. So in the future, if I ever have some situation where I'm not sure what you would want, I don't know how to make the call, I'll at least have some sort of guidelines from you on kind of what it was you were hoping to do with this trust, what you wanted it to promote in your kids' lives. So I asked for kind of a separate one there too. Last thing, and I know we're really close on time, is what are there certain things that you have to keep updated that would become a legal problem if they weren't updated? If they say like, well, gosh, Jim, that document's 15 years old, the hospital's not going to follow it, or the lawyer's not going to follow it, or it could be sued over because it was written in 1998. I mean, what do you have to? When is because sometimes people will say, well, I already did that, but did that as a
long time ago.
Yeah.
Yes, tomorrow we'll actually be talking about some of the documentation decisions, and I'll be helping people understand that. But number one, in the modern era, being able to have healthcare proxy and durable power of attorney, and basically this is why advanced directives in hospitals and doctors' offices are pushed so strongly, is states are really emphasizing this, and so are healthcare systems. And so you probably, are repeatedly being asked, do you have advanced directives and whatever? But I would say durable power of attorney, making sure your will is updated, and healthcare advanced directives are some of the most central documents, because it's actually not so much if you are dead, if you've passed on. As one of a lawyer that I once listened to gave a presentation, he had a great line. He said, don't confuse living and dying. And we all looked at him like, what do you mean? And it's like, you have things prepared for dying, but you need a whole bunch of stuff prepared for if you are alive,
Hmm.
but disabled.
Right.
So don't assume that those things that you've got ready for if you die are going to be substantial for what you need. Prepare for being for living, but not able to make choices.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I know we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. And I also know tomorrow you're going to walk us back through some of these things and look at, okay, how do you make these choices? How do you make decisions? And who, if not you, is the right person to be able to take on some of these things? And that kind of thing can change over time as well. The person, when we redid our estate planning a few years ago, we had people down, we hadn't done it in, sadly, 10 years. And we had people down that I was like, oh gosh, that neighbor moved away 5 years ago and I've never talked to him since. That would not be the right person.
Yeah, and that guardian, got cancer and died, and yeah.
Who knows?
Before we switch, Anna, I'm gonna actually. There's a great question that came up. Can you address the pitfalls of those letters that micromanage future generations and their behaviors?
Yes.
A comment on that. Your letter of wishes needs to be focused on your values. It does not need to be focused on control. And so the idea of imposing or requiring certain things, that's not necessarily what future generations want to hear from you. What they want to hear from you are your wishes. They want to hear the values, the things that are important to you, but the idea of you do need to let go. Families in which they have dealt with micromanaging and over-controlling elders, there are significant problems from that. So be careful how heavy-handed you get in that letter of wishes.
Good advice. I have seen several trusts and things that try to rule from the grave, and I've yet to see that go well. So I agree. I think that is good advice. I'll end saying one of our participants said, if you have all this together, it's like a gift for your family. And I agree.
Absolutely.
I think it is a real gift when you tell people, and it puts people at ease. It puts you at ease. So
And to end on that note, in the beginning, I told a story about Mary and my mother. But once, Mary was taken care of, I want to remind everybody, it's like my mother was able to pass on and have her wishes implemented because I knew and because I was involved. I was very involved in the assisted care facility. And at various times, they wanted to do medical procedures to her that she did not want. And so it is a gift when you do it well. I have experienced that personally. And we want to give everybody in the audience today the opportunity to have the same gift.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Jim. We are now right at 11. We're going to take a 5-minute break just to give people a chance to kind of move around for a second, stand up, use the facilities. We are going to start up, though, exactly at 11:05. I'm going to be right back on. Marty Chisick is going to be with us to talk about how do you discuss these things in a family? Tips for doing that, what you need to think about, all these things. And she's been doing this a long time with families. She's got some good stories. So we look forward to coming back on with her. And at the end, after that session, we'll have time to ask questions of both Jim and Marty, and I'll stay on as well. And we'll take your questions. So we'll give everybody about, again, 5-minute break, and we'll see you back here at 11:05. Thanks so much. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Glad you're here. At this point, we're going to go ahead and go into the session on tips for discussing aging issues as a family. Really, one of the most important tasks of this is communicating. Simply, whether that means talking with a parent about what is it you would want in the future on anything from housing to whatever else it is, where is information, how would I access this, who would you like me to call? It's all of those kinds of things. And that may be, again, asking a parent about that. That may be telling family members about what you want, but just having a communication and talk about these in families. And as Jim alluded to a little bit in his session, is that can be hard to do. Sometimes people don't want to talk about it for just reasons that they don't want to face themselves. Sometimes there can be issues in the family, or maybe there's a lot of people involved. It can be a little prickly, but there's a lot of reasons why sometimes that doesn't happen. Joining us right now is Marty Chisick. She, again, runs Charism Elder Care Services, and she works actually with several of our clients and brings her expertise to them. And one of the things that two of the clients she works with have told me is one of the best things that Marty does is she brings the whole family together. She enables everybody to understand what's going on. She makes sure the communication is going during situations, and that really makes a big difference. Marty, do I have you here on the line for my, there we go. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Oh, we appreciate you being here. Well, let's dive into this a little bit. We talked about how it can be a little bit of an uncomfortable situation. And can you talk a little bit about what are the common hesitations? What is it that people tend to trip on, and maybe why they don't get started with these?
Well, most of the discussions that I end up having are about powers of attorney or durable powers of attorney for healthcare and finance. My practice is primarily seniors. But most of the seniors have children. And so when I talk to the senior about what are your plans, often they will say, well, I just haven't had that conversation with my child yet. I'm not comfortable having that conversation. And I think it's our mortality. And Jim talked some about this, but a lot of it is we procrastinate because it's hard. It is very difficult to sit down and say and ask or have a conversation with your family about their mortality. How do you want to die? How do you want to be buried? You know, do you want to have a service? I'm working right now with a family. I'm the guardian, and I have two daughters. Mom has dementia and is unable to tell us her wishes. And I'm making burial arrangements, but we don't know. Did she want to be cremated? Where did she want to be buried? What do we do? To the point of, I'm new to this case. The nursing home is calling me. She really should be a do not resuscitate. We need some guidance. So the feedback from the facility has been, gosh, it's nice working with somebody like you because you understand. And as a nurse practitioner, I do understand the kind of the clinical underpinnings. And I think that, to answer your question, is also part of it. It's like when I take my car to the dealership, I tell them it's dinging. I don't know what's happening. I don't even know where to start. Mm-hmm. I don't know where to start. I don't know the first question to even begin to ask because it seems so overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, too, I remember we were talking on the phone, you said part of the issue can be people will put these things off because they worry there's a permanence. You know, well, Marty, if I put out there that I want a DNR, a do not resuscitate, well, what if I change my mind on that later? You know, and you said, so sometimes I say nothing because I'm worried about permanence of that decision. But in your opinion, that you shouldn't, you need to, it's better to say nothing, say something than nothing, correct?
Absolutely. And the thing with any of these documents is they can be changed. They can be changed every day if you want to. This is not into perpetuity forever and ever. And so I think it's important. The important part is to talk about it. to let other people know. From a healthcare perspective, if you do not want treatment, room. We ethically and morally.
I lost your sound for just a second there. You said if you do not want treatment.
Ethically and morally, as a healthcare provider, I must provide treatment. Okay. And I can't just cease based on hearsay from somebody that's standing next to my emergency room bed. So it's really important to talk about what if. What do you want? I was recently at I do a lot of public speaking, and I was at a hospital doing a program, and one of the social workers, discharge planners, came down and said, I just got a referral from a physician. The mother, who's alert and oriented, wants a do not resuscitate, but the two daughters don't want her to have it, so I'm supposed to go up and resolve the issue. Mm-hmm. Well, the mother's alert and oriented. She's totally capable of expressing her wishes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we get in these family dynamic kinds of things, or often I do.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it in some ways easier if almost you as a third party? I think sometimes the families, one of the things we had on here, sort of common hesitations, is I don't know where to start, so I'm going to do nothing because I don't know where to start. I think the nice thing about when I've seen you come into a situation is you do know where to start and you know what the options are. You know how to explain them to people. I mean, for most of us, I went through this with my own father last fall. Like, I don't really understand all the, I've never gone down this path before. So we're all kind of guessing at it, but you can come in and help them think through what the options are.
Right. So, I begin any session with a family with education first. This is what we're going to do. And we may be not able to do the entirety today. That's okay. The first time we talk is simply to begin to explore how you feel about things. And I went through the same thing with my dad. He absolutely wanted everything done until a relative had everything done and he saw how catastrophic it can be. So he changed his mind, and that's okay. You also can change who you want to be your decision maker, just like we heard from Jim earlier. There are unscrupulous people out there who will take advantage, and we need to protect each other. So if you don't tell me what you want and what your wishes are, I can't help protect you either. But it is important. And in the healthcare model, it's supposed to be the physician that has these conversations with the individual. Physicians are humans too. Many of them are uncomfortable having the conversation. And they may have a different opinion than what you wish. Here in Illinois, the powers of attorney for healthcare basically say do everything, do nothing, or do what the doctor says. Well, as a healthcare person, I don't know what do everything means. I don't know what do nothing means. And if my physician does not have the same belief system that I have, I don't want him or her making decisions for me.
Right, right. And actually, the way you sort of phrase that sort of hits on sort of the third thing I'd had here, which a lot of times people confuse that I've done it. I'm done. I've made these decisions, because they'll say, well, my attorney knows what I want. Your attorney and healthcare have almost nothing to do with each other. I remember you said at one point, we should think of this as like a three-legged stool, like it's sort of legal, financial, and healthcare. You need to talk with your
Absolutely.
physician.
And when I sit down to talk to people, the first discussion point is, well, my attorney took care of that. Well, no, your attorney did not take care of that. Your attorney had you sign a document, a legal document that is called a power of attorney, a durable power of attorney. Different states have different names for this document, but this is an informed consent decision. Just like if you were having surgery, you can choose not to have surgery, right? So you can choose not to have the document, but you need the information. You need to know the risks and benefits of a decision. And the attorney is, even if it's a physician attorney, at that point in time, they're working as an attorney. They're not working in a clinical capacity. So they cannot have a conversation with you. I work a lot with elder law attorneys, and one of the attorneys said, well, the families will turn to me and say, which of these should I choose? Nothing, everything, or the doctor chooses. And her counsel was, well, most of the clients I work with choose this one. So, that's my guidance. That's not okay. That's certainly not okay.
Right, that's not much guidance. Yeah.
But on the attorney's side, those are hard questions.
Right.
And they do not have the expertise to answer that. So that medical legal document that you have is actually a physician order to treat or not to treat. And many states anymore are changing from what we call the do not resuscitate, or a DNR, to what's known as a POLST, POLST, physician ordered life sustaining treatment. And this is far more comprehensive. It talks about, do you want feeding tubes? Do you want other alternatives for treatment, both pre-hospital? So if you call the ambulance and the ambulance comes, do you want to have this resuscitation done in the ambulance, or do you not? So it helps open up some of those issues, but still the underpinning of the real informed consent discussion still often is delayed.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
The delay.
Go ahead.
Go.
I was going to say, having been down this road again with my father recently, even when he was very clear about, for example, in his case, they said, well, he should have a feeding tube. He said, I don't want a feeding tube. I am not, he made that very clear. He was very clear sound in mind. He told his doctors. They still will try to do that if you go to the hospital. It seems like it's very hard in some ways to get these things. You really have to advocate for what the person wants, even I think when it's documented. A question came in that said, if my mother is not capable to tell her wishes in a point in the future, but tells me, is it enough to tell the doctor hospital that I know her wishes, or do they have to be written?
They have to be written.
Okay.
They must be written down.
Okay.
Thankfully, you had the discussion, but the next step was to get that documented. Because of the situations that Jim talked about and the unscrupulous people that I talk or deal with often. As a healthcare practitioner, I don't know what your mother's wishes were. And
right.
That absolutely has to be documented.
I think particular in a family situation, what if my sister had come in and said, no, we absolutely want a feeding tube, I think that's where things get confusing for the hospital. If you've got two adults.
Right. And from a healthcare perspective, we are to save lives. And so I think often physicians, maybe this is my bias, I will admit that, physicians have a different modality, a different thought process of treatment than a nurse or nurse practitioner. We tend to be more advocates, whereas the physician is more a curative kind of person. And so we're trying to cure your malnutrition, right? And the only way that I can cure your malnutrition, because you cannot take food orally, is by putting a feeding tube in.
Yeah.
But no one has that. Few people get the discussion of these are the risks and benefits of a feeding tube, and they are not without risks as well. I, in fact, have my pulse in the glove box of my car. If I'm in an auto accident, I do not want to be resuscitated. And I have told everyone I know of my family that you will not feed me your pureed diet that you put in the blender. I will die with that cherry from the cherry pie in my lungs, and I will be happy when I die. I'm very, very specific about what I want. And it was interesting when I put mine together. I have two younger siblings, and I sent them the documents. My sister's my power of attorney for healthcare, my brother, power of attorney for finance. And both of them got the mail the same day and called me, what's going on? Is there something going on? Are you not telling us anything? And I said, no, I want you to be prepared because you have to make decisions for me. And this is about me.
Right.
This is not about you. And I'm sad and uncomfortable that you're uncomfortable, but this is about me. You say you love me. And so I want you to know what, kind of like our letters. I want you to know what is important to me. And it's, we don't always do selfish so well, but it's important. And the point that Jim made about it's the living. I have a 54-year-old with significant dementia right now. We don't expect to have dementia at 54. Thankfully, all the documents are in order, but you know, it could be an auto accident, it could be a stroke, it could be a heart attack, it could be COVID. And it's just so important no matter what age you are. And when I'm working with clients, I'm working often with the senior, with the children that are my age, and I then bring in their children, the grandchildren. Do you have the documents prepared for your children to know what your wishes are? We're never too old or young to do this.
Yeah. And actually, Marty, that's a perfect lead in. And the next sort of thing we were going to discuss is why have a family discussion? What are some of the benefits? And we listed on here, it gives people permission to talk about a difficult subject. I think sometimes just saying, we're going to have this time and place, and I'm going to bring in Marty, and we're going to all sit down and we're going to kind of have this conversation. Otherwise, it's hard to have it. It's hard to get through it. It's hard. But if you sort of focus on it at a time when everyone can come together, I think that's important. I think it's also a relief for people to have their wishes known. Just like Jim said, well, now we have the red folder. I update the red folder. People know where it is. We have a family discussion about it. What you were just talking about reduces the emotional burden on family members. I have a client that called, and they have several adult siblings and some elderly parents. And they said, well, what are we going to do going forward? We're a little, worried as our parents get older, and their parents are still both perfectly capable of saying what they want. So I was like, well, you don't have to guess about it. You don't have to later worry you're going to get upset at each other about it. We can just, while they're here, they can just tell you what they want. That's the best thing to do, because again, conflict comes up due to ambiguity a lot of times, I think.
Absolutely. And it's we have this perception that mortality is for those with longevity. And while it is, statistically, the probability is such, having those family members at the table are important. All families don't like to sit at the table. And so often I will have the conversation with the senior, and the senior is relieved. Oh my gosh, somebody's finally talked to me about this. And so what I end up being is that facilitator and telling the children or spouse or whoever is part of that family, significant other, this is your loved one's wishes. This is not a debate. This is not for you to, certainly you may share your wishes, that's great, but this is not about you debating the wishes of someone else. And it's often difficult to bring it back to, why are we here? We're not here for a family discussion. We are here to lovingly talk about the wishes of someone that we care deeply about, and that person cares deeply about us, because this discussion is not easy for them either.
Yeah. Marty, what do you recommend before you bring everyone together? We talked the other day about, you were saying you want to get some things done ahead of time. If it's about your own situation, what are those sort of boxes you want checked in terms of making certain decisions, connecting with professionals, all those kind of things?
I think the first thing, the pre-work is really sitting down and digesting options with the person before the family meeting, so that that individual is capable of advocating for themselves. They're capable of saying, I have thought this through. These are the risks and benefits that I have investigated, and these are my choices based on that. Otherwise, often that person can almost be attacked by all of the other participants and questioned about why they're making decisions. So we sit down and we talk about the risks and benefits of having choices on the treatment side. And again, you can change. If today you decide you want all treatments done, that's perfectly fine, but you can change it. But what's important is, as Jim and you talked earlier, is that we continually evaluate what our wishes are so that everyone knows what those wishes are and that they're documented. My sister had breast cancer. Her decision always had been do nothing until she got breast cancer. And when she had breast cancer and had a 10-year-old child, her whole perspective of life changed.
Of course. Right.
Everything, because I want to see my child graduate from high school and I want to see my child. So life changes, things happen, and it's okay to change your mind. This is not an in-stone discussion. This is a discussion to share my wishes with the people that I love, so that if I need you, I don't put you through a great deal of stress. And I think when I posture it that way, families understand, oh gosh, you're right. I don't want to have to make a decision about something that I don't feel clear about in a stressful crisis situation. Don't put me in that place. And so often the discussion that I have is, if not, then. If you don't make the decision now, these are the potential consequences.
Yeah, it'll be in a crisis.
Right. Mm-hmm. Don't know, because we don't understand conceptually what's going on. It's difficult to know what the crisis is going to look like, or the if-then is going to look like, because we don't understand. It's not that people are not bright and intelligent, well-read. When you're in this situation, it is very tough.
Marty, one thing someone wrote in and said, can there be a video or audio recording of wishes? Does it have to be a written document? I've actually had people ask that before, like, can we just make a video about what we want? Does that, I don't know, in healthcare, if that would stand. I'm not sure.
No, from a healthcare power of attorney, treating or not treating is a physician order.
Okay.
So I need to have a physician sign the document. I've had people that filled out the document, but the physician never signed it. So we never had a physician order. So not to treat, just like to treat, is a physician order. And certainly, the video is great because it allows you to articulate your wishes in a broader method. But from a healthcare perspective, I need to have that document clearly documented, and also who you share it with. Don't lock it up in a safe deposit box. Share it with everyone that could potentially be a participant for decision making. Next door neighbors, children, your doctors. Each time you go to the hospital, bring it with you. Don't assume that anyone has access to the document, even with electronic healthcare records. And you may have changed your mind since the electronic healthcare record had the prior document. So, a video is fine, but we must have an authenticated physician order for those of us in healthcare. And you're not going to bring your video to the emergency room, right?
Right.
This is a crisis situation. I need to have that document, and it's recommended that you actually have it particularly in senior situation, in a very prominent place. Usually put it on the refrigerator in brightly colored paper. So when an EMT walks in, or a home care nurse, they see right away what the wishes are and we are more able to comply with them.
Okay. So video is good for maybe intentions and expressing those kind of things, but it will not be something right at the hospital. When it comes to healthcare, you need to have specific documents completed for those to be followed.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And you talked a little bit about who to involve. We said here all children, possibly adult grandchildren, individuals who are your powers of attorney. I've known people that have, signed powers of attorney and not let those people know because they're like, well, I didn't want, my son to realize we'd appointed my daughter or vice versa. What do you say to people who are kind of worried about, I don't know if it's sort of seeming favoritism or something like that. That actually has come up a couple of times with powers of attorney I feel like I'm choosing somebody over other people where it's, I don't know, really you just have to choose one person.
It's very difficult. And even from, I don't pretend to be an attorney, but when I see wills or trusts, wills are public documents. Trusts tend not to be so public, and so people are hesitant to even put in a will what they want to have after their death because it will be a public document. Again, it's about the individual, and that's why the family meetings are so important, is to hash through that. Often it's, well, my oldest son should be that, and my oldest daughter should be that, or my youngest daughter should be that, and there are 4 or 5 children. Well, why wasn't I selected? And so you're able to talk about that. You're able to say, well, maybe the oldest son isn't the right one. Maybe the oldest son doesn't even want to do this, but is fearful to say, I don't want to do it, Dad. I don't feel comfortable doing that. The reason my sister is my power of attorney for healthcare is because she will say, stop treating Marty. My brother is incapable of saying that. They love me. They care about me. They want me to be okay. There's no way he could say, stop treating her. So I know who I can rely on. And your family members know each other. They know the strengths and weaknesses of each other. And so when you talk about it in those terms, I think it helps settle things for the future.
I think too, it's important what you just said to understand that the stop treating people sometimes is very, very difficult. Again, in my dad's situation, when we started working with hospice, and I get along really well with my sister and my mom and my dad, we're all on the same page. So we don't have a lot of other sort of noise or conflict coming into the situation that sometimes can be there. But even with that, it was stunning to me. I remember at one point in the hospice, we were talking about, well, what if he falls again at home, or what if, he's choking? And I remember saying like, well, would we call an ambulance? And the woman said, there's no time when you would call an ambulance. And that was just to hear that, just that there would be no situation where we would call an ambulance was really stunning. And I mean, like, my father sat there and listened through it and he was okay with it, but it's surprising. I think it's easy to say you will act and do certain things, but that was, I remember, to me at least, shocking to hear that, we're not in a situation where we're going to be calling an ambulance anymore. So I think you have to be prepared for carrying things through.
Same thing happened to me. I was power of attorney of healthcare for both of my parents. My dad had a massive stroke. I have counseled probably thousands of people on hospice and the importance of hospice and the importance of end-of-life discussions. But when I signed Dad's hospice papers, it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. And I knew from a quality of life standpoint, he would not want to live as he was.
Yeah.
But signing on the dotted line was very difficult. And my brothers, when I called my 2 sibs to tell them what I had done, my brother's comment was, can't wait for Dad just to die. You got to kick him off a little sooner, huh? You don't know
wow.
what will come out of people's minds. And I have a good relationship with both of my siblings, but they were in pain. We were all in pain. And when we're in pain and in crisis, our best self is not always the one that surfaces.
Right. It's true. Oh.
And so there needs to be some forgiveness and understanding as well. The last thing we want to do is fracture families because they're so important.
That's right. Yeah. And it is a tough time for everyone. Well, Marty, getting ahead of that tough time is kind of what we're talking about, how to make that easier so that there are some directions there. What do you want people to include in this conversation? I know the other day we talked about some things like the location of documents, who are the powers of attorney. Sometimes, though, it might extend to who are the professionals I work with. Here's their contact information. Here's my physician's info, my spiritual leader. Preferences about where you'd like to live, or as we've talked about a little bit here, end of life wishes. What are those the main things that you usually cover within this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. And also burial and wishes after death, and often wishes about things in the house that have emotional attachments but no real financial value. Yeah. What do we do with those? My mother had a salt crock that I would love to have had, but my sister put her name on it first, and I'm okay with that because it's still in our family and it will go to my niece, and that's okay. So, minuscule things. I go through people's homes and, I'll get a call. I just got a call last week. There's a picture of the Sears Tower. I know it's not Sears Tower anymore, but the Sears Tower that Mom and Dad had in the house that I really, really want. That's important, things that are really, really important to us that have emotional connections. Make sure you get those kinds of things documented. How we did it in our family is we put our names on things. And if there was no conflict with whose name was on it, Mom made the final decision because they were her things. They were not our things. So it's just important to have those discussions. Talk about who you want to have responsibility for what, but make sure you share that with that person, because you certainly don't want someone who's uncomfortable making those decisions in emotional state that they will be trying to make a decision they're uncomfortable with. That's unkind. Yeah. And it won't get you what you want and need either.
Okay. Being conscious of time, I do want to move on to say, one of the things we want to help people think through is, are you ready for a family discussion? How would you sort of think that through? And I'm assuming you're not in crisis mode. So, and would a third party facilitator make this easier? One of the things we wanted to do with this program is introduce people like yourself and Joanne tomorrow, because I think a lot of times we do think we have to do this on our own. And you don't. There's care managers, there's people who've been down this road many, many times who know what the options are and how to think through them. So, when you're brought in, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the when I bring up the topics, one of the first questions or comments that I hear is, I didn't know there was anybody like you out there that could help me through this stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe shame on us for not being better at marketing, but we're not marketers. And most of us don't have a huge thriving business that we can rely on. And I would lose much of the interpersonal communication and contact I have with families if I was part of a big organization. So, but I think doing the pre-discussion, having the discussion with the family members from my perspective that I'm working with that have hired me. And then setting the stage, doing the pre-discussion. What are your interests? What do you want to do? What are the risks and benefits of each of your decisions? And help clarify that. And once we have that clarified, then often it's me that will have the outreach to the family. It is a little less stressful, I think, than mom and dad calling the family meeting, particularly if it's a family that's not ever had a family meeting before. And it offers me the opportunity to talk to those individual children and feel them out, do some education. The last thing we want at a family meeting is an altercation. So again, depending on each family, feeding through that. Sometimes the parents are absolutely certain, I'm the one that needs to share this with the kids. Or the senior and I together have the conversation. So each family is different. And the issue is often when there's children that are not playing nice together. How do you deal with the conflict that brings? And that, could probably Jim and I could talk about that for a week. It's difficult. Yeah. It's not an easy discussion. It's not a discussion that the typical man or woman on the street has enough information about to really feel confident having.
Yeah. You learn a lot on this journey. I learned with my father. I was like, wow, I didn't realize this about care facilities, or I didn't realize this about hospice, or I didn't realize there's just a lot of things that you learn on doing, which is not necessarily, it would have been nice to have someone to walk you through it. So I'm glad we do know about resources like yours and can bring this to our clients. One person wrote in to ask, what's the best way to have this discussion when siblings are not always in the same state, like by Zoom? What do you recommend? Okay.
Yeah, I've had Zoom meetings. I've also just had telephone conferences. But everybody needs to be invited. If they choose not to participate, that is certainly their choice. Yes. And sometimes it's so uncomfortable that people just cannot participate. And that's okay too. Mm-hmm. But those that are interested in participating, it's important. Zoom is really a good way to in this day and age to have it. And even with people all over the country, all over the world, we still can communicate face to face, which is much better than in a letter or over the phone.
Yeah. I will sort of also back up what you just said about if people can't do it. I say that with a lot of difficult family conversations. You cannot let one or two people who just don't want the conversation to happen hijack it. Because, you have to say, well, we're going to walk forward with the willing, and we're going to go ahead and have the conversation. We'll let you know about it, or we'll record it, or what have you. And I've found a lot of times then that people do want to participate at that point. And it's not because maybe they're trying to be ugly or something about it, but it's just that it's hard. It's hard for them to do these, to have some of these conversations can be difficult. So, but not having them isn't an option, and you can't let one person sort of decide that for the group. So sometimes you have to move forward.
Right.
It's pretty a little tough.
And I find that if I posture this in why are we having this discussion, that it's about the person that we love and being able to support them in the quality of life that they want for the tenure of their life, that's far less intimidating than you want to sign a do not resuscitate. This is a discussion about life and love. And if you can't participate, I understand, but this person is inviting you to the table if you're comfortable.
Exactly. It's a good way to put it. Let's see. Oh, one more question before we move on. Someone said, what about including in-laws? Perhaps one is loved and respected and another not so much. So, that can.
Yeah, it's again, you know the players, and someone like me can help you walk through the relationships, who should be involved, at what level should they be involved, You know, if one of the in-laws is an active participant and one is not, you invite them both, and the one who's interested comes to the table and is involved in the discussion. It's very hard, particularly in those situations where you have someone who is not interested in participating. It really inhibits the communication, but don't let that stop what's really essential to your life and well-being.
Yeah, I would agree. And at this point, we're right at 11:45. So I'm going to invite Jim back in. Jim, if you can join us too, because we're getting a few more questions, and I just want to make sure I give a chance for everyone to answer. Jim, you might want to I know you've had a lot of family situations where there's been some conflict, yes, just a tiny bit. So any thoughts you have on what we were just saying about, you know, when someone's not ready to have the conversation, or you've got maybe some in-law relations that vary across the family, those kind of things?
Yes. No, Marty, I think you raised many great points and anecdotes. I was making notes while you guys were talking. A couple things. In in-law or blended family situations, or situations even where you have conflict among siblings and maybe one or two siblings tends to be disruptive, what families need to do is, number one, this may be a situation where you really need to get a facilitator, whether it's the family attorney or an outside facilitator or, you know, whatever. But if it seems really hard, then get some help. Don't try and just muddle through. The other is, what I find really helpful is set communication ground rules for the meeting. To exclude somebody because they're disruptive makes it be person-based. You know, well, we want you, but we don't want you. If you set a level playing field of everybody needs to follow the following rules. You have to speak respectfully. You have to make I statements. You know, I think this, as opposed to, we all know that you're no good. Other sorts of things. Then if 6 people in the room are following the rules and one person is not, you have a basis for having that person change their behavior, or they may need to leave the meeting. So moving from person-based to kind of rules-based management of meetings tends to be something, and a lot of families sort of don't know to do that. One other aspect that I'll throw in is, Marty, you talked about physicians and what they would do, and sometimes they're trained and sometimes they're not about these difficult situations. What people need to know is a lot of physicians have had no training in how to have difficult conversations. But more and more in medical school and in healthcare systems, they're doing workshops and training on exactly these sorts of things, partly because the geriatric population is moving towards 20% of the American population within about 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so physicians vary, but most interestingly, there were studies done with physicians, particularly I think it was in oncology, cancer treatment, where they said, what treatments and how aggressive do you tend to be when discussing it with patients? And then they said, and if it were your own situation, what would you do? And there was a huge discrepancy where doctors will often, either because of fear of litigation or pleasing the family or difficulty with it, they will say, oh yes, there are things that we can do and things that you should try. There's no reason to give up yet. But when they really know the medical information and how dire things are, when asked, it's like, well, if this were you, they often say, oh, forget it. I'd stop because the treatment's going to be horrible and it's not going to do anything. And so seeing if you can get a physician to say, if this were you, what would you do, may or may not, they may not give an honest answer. But if you can take them aside and say, if this really were you, knowing the costs and benefits of treatment, would you proceed? And then watch carefully. Sometimes the nonverbal behavior with somebody squirming will tell you it may be time to move on.
And sometimes, Jim, their hands are a little tight. right? Isn't that
Their
the case?
hands may be tied, yes, legally,
Depending on,
and the
yeah,
fear of litigation alone that sometimes hospital systems will say, don't insert yourself. This is the family's decision. Just stay out of it. Give them medical information. But, Anna, you and I talked once. I had, like we are talking on this call, webinar. I once got a call late at night. My mother remarried after my father died, and my stepfather had a massive stroke. And they were calling me from the ER because they said, your mother wants you to talk to the doctor. She was overwhelmed, and I have medical training and background and knowledge. And it was like, here, you handle it. And so I was talking in the ER with a young ER doc and trying to get a feel, because he said, your stepfather's had a pretty massive stroke. And I was trying to, and we did this dance. Well, like, how bad is it? It's pretty bad, but you never know what can happen. Okay, well, can you tell me what? Oh, it's pretty bad. And we went back and forth, and eventually I was reading between the lines. It's like, he's not going to survive this. And so I helped my mother, because they needed to hear it from her, say, don't start him on treatment, just keep him comfortable. And he died, I think, 18 hours later. So.
Right.
I think it's important also, and if we look at the healthcare system today, an office visit is 7 minutes long. How much discussion can I have with my practitioner? These are intimate, comprehensive, difficult discussions. I've encouraged people to actually make an appointment, an extended appointment with their physician to specifically talk about this. I need a half-hour appointment because we want to talk about whatever it happens to be. And physicians are very open and willing to have those discussions. I tend not to think the litigation is quite as significant as you do, because I think documentation and informed consent and participation is important. I'm also a legal nurse consultant, so the records that I review are when someone else other than me makes decisions. If I am held accountable to my own decisions, I still can litigate the situation, but the probability of winning is slim, because I was an informed consumer and I made decisions, good, bad, right, or wrong, but they were also documented. And so we want the whole process. We want the discussion. We want the informed consent. We want the discussion to weigh pros and cons. And then we need to have it documented. And then we need to share those wishes with important people in our lives. And we pull in people that don't have the information that we lack. That's why people like Jim, me, and Anna are on this call.
If I may, Marty, if I may interrupt you for a second, you just said something really important, and I want to reinforce it. You made a comment, which is to talk about the decision-making behind the decision. That it's not just, I don't want life support, or I do, or whatever. When the courts or the family or the medical record or a physician actually sees a little detail of how you got there, it is so much stronger, and it reinforces this was an informed decision. So what you said about not only having the conversation, but sort of documenting the component steps of why and how somebody made that decision really is helpful.
It is indeed.
One thing I want us to get to before we hit the top right at noon is we had a question come in that said, how can you complete the advanced treatment directive if the parent has dementia and is not really able to comprehend the choices? And I think people do find themselves.
Yeah, it's too late because, and it's funny, I think it's actually a really good question, because in that gray zone, where either not that many people know about it or, it's in and out. People try and skate through and get something done. You may, have it work out. But if there's any conflict in the family, or if anything comes up questioning whether that was a legal signature and a legal document, and if it seemed as though you made something happen knowing that the parent did not have capacity, it's going to be a big mess. So families will often try and make something happen when they're on thin ice, but that's a very dangerous situation to be in. Marty, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And when I'm working with a senior, the first thing I get is a neuropsych evaluation, because that person will tell me what the capacity is, and I can then decide what we're going to do. That neuropsych evaluation is so important. You don't need a physician order. What neuropsych testing is, and we're talking to Jim, who's a neuropsychologist, it's comprehensive testing, cognitive, verbal thinking, with standardized tools that the clinician uses, age-related, to tell what capacity of thinking and processing the senior or the individual has, and then that guides yes or no. That person may or may not make decisions. Without that, we're walking, with a time bomb, and that's how I often get involved in being a guardian, because the family now, there's surrogacy laws in states where if the husband cannot make decisions, the next in the chain of command is the wife, and then the children, and so the husband and wife both have dementia. Now we have 3 children who are all pointed in different directions. The Surrogacy Act is of no value, and you don't want the court involved in your family. You do not want the court involved in your family. I often have families will say, well, let's just do a guardianship. That'll take care of it all.
Oh, no.
No, we want to be proactive. All guardians are not like me. Guardians don't necessarily have healthcare knowledge and background and able to walk you through this. And so,
no, you're absolutely right.
Proactive.
Is there value in at least getting the adult children all on the same page? If if I've got my mother and she doesn't have capacity anymore, should I at least try to be on the same page with my siblings? I mean, I'm assuming. I don't know if that.
Well, I think if I may, first of all, education really helps, because people have all sorts of ideas and implications. And I support, obviously, Marty, what you said, which is data tend to take it a little bit out of the he said, she said range. Well, no, she's fine. I talked to her yesterday. She told me about when I was 15. She obviously is okay. And somebody else says, yeah, but she can't tell you what she had for breakfast. And so the idea of cognitive evaluation that is standardized and norms says, here is where they are. And we know that they were here. They really lost a lot. So sometimes that will get siblings on the same page when you're looking at data. But one of the things, and I know we have to go now, but maybe tomorrow, it's a teaser. What we can also talk about is the role of money. We are talking to an affluent audience. Marty, you made a good comment about, so I was so sad when I heard about your brother saying, oh, you want them to die sooner with your father. But wow. I think we need to acknowledge and discuss tomorrow the fact that money comes into play, not only within the family. Oh, well, you just want, to get the money, or you don't, or whatever. But for the healthcare system, physicians often are mistrustful in situations of wealth. And I have seen this firsthand, where the physician says, the kids are just trying to get mom's money. She's fine. I don't know what the big problem is. When clearly mom was demented and there was a very well-meaning, daughter involved. So I think we need to talk about the family stresses that can be avoided including the ones where people assume motivation because of money.
Okay, I'm going to let us end on that note. And that is something is a good introduction to tomorrow. A huge thank you to Marty and Jim for today. Tomorrow, we are going to focus more on implementation. So today we sort of talked about what are the components involved in longevity. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about, okay, well, you know what the components are. How do we actually make decisions about these things? What are the choice sets that we have? And how do you think through those? So we hope you plan to join us again tomorrow. With that said, the program is now adjourned. Again, Jim and Marty, thank you. And we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Thanks so much.